Welcome to my field of dreams. It reaches far and wide. To you it might seem nothing much, but I stand here with pride. If you build it, they will come.
Hi, I'm Nemo James, singer, songwriter, and author, and I'd like to welcome you once again to my podcast, Nemo James Travel Diaries. This podcast is ad-free, but I hope you will forgive me for including short excerpts of some of my songs. If you would like to hear more of the songs I include, you will find a link to them in the show notes. If you enjoy this podcast, please click the subscribe button and share it with your friends. It will mean a lot to me. On this episode, we will be travelling to Sri Lanka, Matara, Tangalle, Galle, and Colombo. We went by taxi to Matara, our first beach resort. We were staying in a beautiful house and unusually well built with quality materials and fittings. There must have been some confusion with the word restaurant in Sri Lanka, as it was not the first hotel we stayed at that claimed to have a restaurant but didn't. It didn't bother us, as we usually preferred to eat out anyway. The owner recommended a walk along the coast path to a place called the Doctor's House, run by an Australian. It was one of the weirdest cafes I had ever seen. It was a large open piece of land with makeshift chairs everywhere, and at the back they had some basic accommodation for surfers. There were multicoloured tables and chairs, hammocks, platforms of wood hanging by ropes from trees where people could lie, and lounges of every conceivable shape and size. They only served pizzas, but by now we were starving, so we ordered one, which was excellent. After lunch we went to the beach, but it wasn't great for swimming as there were a lot of rocks, so we had to make do with paddling around in the rock pools. That night we went to a lovely little beachfront restaurant that was part of a hotel. A Scottish girl greeted us at the door, and after taking our order, we got chatting. She told us that 13 years earlier she had booked a room at that hotel for one night, had met and fallen in love with the owner and had been there ever since. Rarely had I seen someone so happy and content. After dinner, we returned to the doctor's house, where they had live music. The place was full of people sitting in a multitude of mixed seating as well as cross-legged on the grass. The only available seating was 2 giant beanbags, which was surprisingly comfortable even though I spent most of the time hanging off the edge, and Federika had to summon help to get me out. The band was locals playing a weird mixture of Bob Marley and Sri Lankan reggae. They were terrible, and it sounded like each of them was playing different songs at the same time, but we loved them. They played just for the love of it and didn't care what people thought of them, which was as it should be. I worked for so many years playing music I hated, just for the money. The drummer was sitting on a box, playing it between his legs with just his hands. I heard a bass drum somewhere, but couldn't figure out where it came from. He even bashed the cymbal with his hand, which couldn't have been very comfortable. The result was a full sound from a kit that was entirely homemade except for the cymbal. It was a great night, and I was again reminded that it was often the most unlikely of places that held the fondest memories. The next day was devoted to sun worship, or, to be precise, sunshade worship, with a break to devour a large red snapper smothered in garlic, ginger, and soya sauce. At night we went to the doctor's house again, which I was sure would be my favourite place of the whole holiday. That area of Matara was idyllic, but there was so much rubbish on the road to the restaurants. I assumed there was no rubbish collection, or people had to pay for collection, so they took the free option of throwing it in the bushes. Our next stop was a beach hotel near Tangalle for 4 nights. Sri Lankan architects, being fairly new to tourism and short of money, seemed to embrace the fashion of using polished concrete as a finish. To save even more money, they sometimes left out the polishing, so a lot of the buildings looked like they belonged in a Russian holiday resort. I honestly didn't know whether our hotel, Asana Beach House, was unfinished or needed renovation, as the only good thing about concrete is that it has a timeless quality. Even the bedside tables and doorless wardrobes were made of concrete. I must admit they were very quick to fix things. I told them the toilet seat was broken, so they solved the problem by taking it away and leaving us with the bare porcelain. It wasn't quite the fix I had in mind, but at least it stopped me from falling off the toilet mid-sentence. It was all good fun and was my favourite place so far, as the location was perfect and we had a lovely little terrace with a hammock. The sea was only a short walk across a lawn, and we fell asleep every night to the sound of waves crashing onto the shore. The water was lovely and warm, and the sea was very rough, so swimming consisted of jumping up and down, avoiding the impact of the waves. At sunset, we went for a walk along the beach and were accosted by a man who ran a beach hut restaurant. It was tiny and with virtually no facilities, not even a fridge. I would normally be wary of eating in a place like that, but we arranged that he would go to the market the next morning and buy us a fish to barbecue for lunch the next day. That, with some rice, would be safe enough to eat. The next day, we did nothing but lie on the beach, and the fish lunch was superb. The owner was going to buy us a grey mullet, which was not my favourite fish, but he ended up getting a barracuda, although, unless it changed shape during the cooking process, I had my doubts. Who cared? It tasted great. We asked him if he could get some crabs for the next day, and he quoted us quite a high price for 1 kilo of crabs, which we accepted. Next day he served us 2 crabs, which were nowhere near 1 kilo, but they were tasty and fun to eat, using a rolling pin to crack the shells. To make a change and to maintain a shred of tourist credibility, we went to see the Temple of the Something or Other. It was a 20-kilometre drive and once again involved climbing a lot of stairs, which we were used to by now. At the top was a cave with paintings and lots of Buddhas inside, and a nice little viewpoint. A few people were sitting there waiting for the sun to set, which, due to some clouds, was a non-event. Having done our tourist duty, we were ready for a curry, and as we felt we could trust the tuk-tuk driver, he was one of the managers of the hotel, we asked him to take us to wherever he recommended. He took us to a nice little crowded restaurant by the sea, where the owner, after hearing we wanted Sri Lankan curry, looked at us like we were crazy. He only served seafood. So there was our Sri Lankan hotel manager, who had no idea where to get a good Sri Lankan curry. He and the restaurant owner entered into a long conversation about where to take us, as if we were the first tourists in history ever to want curry. We were driven a couple of kilometres to a very basic restaurant set by the side of the main road, and considering it was completely empty, we were a little concerned. The owner was very friendly and spoke good English, and the first thing he did was show us a thick book with all the people who had eaten there in the past. It was packed with people singing their praises, many of whom said it was the best curry they had eaten in Sri Lanka, so I was confident it would be okay. It was a family-run business where his mother-in-law cooked and his wife helped to serve. The owner brought out the beer I ordered and crouched down so he was literally pouring it under the table. Anyone looking at him from a certain angle would have thought he was pissing into a glass. When the glass was full, he placed the bottle on the floor and asked me to leave it there because they didn't have a license. If the police came, I had to tell them that I bought the beer somewhere else. Thank you very much, but if that happened, I would have the choice of getting the owner into trouble or lying to the policeman and getting myself into trouble. Sorry, mate, but if there is a raid, you are on your own. So there we were in an empty restaurant in Sri Lanka with plates set on a Scottish tablecloth with the owner, his wife and child standing by the side of our table watching us eat. It was a bizarre evening and an excellent curry. Most of the time, we had the beach to ourselves and even our own palm tree to sit under.
Me, I like to go down to the shore, put my feet in the water till my toes get sore. With a book in my hand and a beer by my side. Before you write me up, you better give it a try. Tomorrow's gonna come and I'll do the same. If you feel feeling stressed, then you got yourself to blame. So get yourself down to the edge of the shore and put your toes in the water until they get sore.
Every time we appeared, a couple of dogs came for a cuddle and sat with us all day. It was a large crescent-shaped beach with golden sand and fishing boats scattered along the shore. Up to that point, we had been pleasantly surprised at the lack of mosquitoes that TripAdvisor had warned about. I had bought 2 expensive repellents and hadn't used them at all. We noticed a lot of red marks on Federika's legs, which didn't bother her, so we assumed they were from sandflies. The next day, mosquito bites started to appear on both of us, and by our last day, we both had hundreds of bites, which were itching like crazy. We had mosquitoes in Croatia, but I rarely got bitten, so it was strange that they should suddenly start attacking. This was the first place neither of us wanted to leave, but it was a relief when we did, in the hope that the next place would be mosquito-free like all the others we had been. While having breakfast on our last day, we got chatting with an English couple who had just arrived at the beginning of their holiday, and the woman was panicking because she had forgotten to bring her blood pressure medication. The hotel manager made a note of the drug she needed and told her not to worry. Half an hour later, he returned with a box of pills and a bill for £3.50. In the UK, there was a prescription charge of £8.40 on all drugs, and as they were subsidised by the NHS, I assumed the actual cost was a lot more. I decided that when we got back to the UK, I would write to the NHS in my capacity as a consultant with a flat fee of £9.50, which compares favourably to the £10,000 an hour they usually pay for consultants. I will advise them to buy all their drugs from Sri Lanka. It will save the NHS millions of pounds a year, and I will earn a nice little £9.50 in return. Why had no one thought of it before? Next stop was Galle. Hotel Fort was next to the Galle fort walls and owned by a Sri Lankan woman who had spent the last 35 years living in Monte Carlo, of all places. Her father was a farmer in Galle, and the hotel was built by her as an extension to her father's house. It was a new hotel built with surprisingly high-quality fittings and would have been perfect but for the fact that our room had no outside window and so was quite dark. The owner was very friendly and couldn't do enough for us after I fixed some long-standing problems she had with her Booking.com account. She showed us the back of the hotel, which had a small, annexed building that was subject to strict regulations, so any alterations or repairs had to maintain the original structure. Governments everywhere lose control of their sanity when it comes to listed buildings, but her problem was a new one on me. The original building was made with bamboo held together by mud and then plastered. During the building of the new hotel, a section of plaster came away and showed that some of the mud was missing. She wanted to plaster over it, but the inspector saw it and insisted that she use the original material, which was mud, even though it was going to be covered with plaster. Not surprisingly, she couldn't find anyone who knew how to work with mud, so they were at a standstill. As if that wasn't daft enough, the front wall was leaning badly and looked like it would fall at any time. The council's solution was to wait and let the wall fall down and rebuild it using non-existent mud workers. It was nearly sunset, so we had a pleasant walk around the fort walls and watched the sun go down. Galle was by far the most touristy town we had been to in Sri Lanka, with most of the tourists being Chinese. The fort and town were originally built by the Dutch, so we could see a lot of Dutch influence. It was a lovely little town which would have been dramatically improved if they had pedestrianised some of the streets, which were small and chaotic due to taxis and tuk-tuks training for the Sri Lankan Grand Prix. We hired a tuk-tuk to take us to a beach in Hikkaduwa and were lucky to get a very interesting driver who spoke good English. On the way, we passed the spot that was the worst affected by the 2004 tsunami. Whenever I read about that tsunami, it always sounded like Thailand was the worst affected, but I was surprised to hear that Sri Lanka had 10 times more deaths. We were mesmerized as our driver told us of his experience on that terrible day. He was on the beach when the first big wave came. He managed to swim to a tree, and after being rescued, he made his way to his house, but was confident it would be okay because it was on higher ground. After checking that his family was safe, he went back to help others. He told us that he had saved 3 foreigners, which seemed a strange statement to make. One would assume that whether they were foreigners or not would be irrelevant, but he explained that it was a Sri Lankan's duty to save foreigners first. It might seem strange to pick and choose who to save, but I know in some cultures they regard a visitor to their home or country as being more important than themselves. Poor families will give what little food to a guest because that is their duty. I am sure he didn't leave local people to drown so he could go off and save foreigners, so I suppose locals just didn't count in his tally. We stopped at the place where an overcrowded train was hit and derailed by the first wave. Some people got out and sheltered behind or on top of the train, thinking they were safe. Then a second wave came that was worse than the first because by then all the houses had been demolished, so there was nothing to slow the wave down. In terms of fatalities, it was the worst train accident in history. 1,700 people from the train were confirmed dead, but it was thought that at least 2,000 died, as it was impossible to know exactly how many were on the train. To add to the tragedy, the authorities knew that tsunami was coming and managed to stop 5 other trains in time. This train had stopped at a station, and while the authorities were frantically phoning the station to warn them, the station personnel were helping people onto the train. Had someone been in the office to answer the phone, all those lives would have been saved. Finally, we stopped at the Tsunami Museum, and what an experience that was. I think it was the informal way that it was put together in a tatty old building that made it all the more poignant. In the first room were lots of photos and facts about the tsunami. We see dead bodies all the time on TV, so I suppose we get hardened to it, but what got to me was the photos of people and their accounts written in capitals underneath them. The more I read, the more emotional I became, and I was already finding it difficult when I got to the following account.
I was in the home with my family when the tsunami hit. I got into the coconut tree there for I was safety. You can see that coconut tree through this picture in my garden. But my family members died. Now I am alone. Samindu.
At this point, I became overcome by emotion and left the hut before I started crying like a baby. Our driver told us that not one statue of Buddha was destroyed by the tsunami. It reaffirmed his belief in Buddhism, and he became more devout than ever. After a day at the beach, we returned to Galle for yet more strolling around town. As in all tourist towns, most shops sold the same Chinese imports, but we still managed to find a few good shops tucked away here and there. We went to one restaurant recommended by TripAdvisor that offered rice and 10 curries for an absurdly low price. We ordered only one meal by mistake, but still didn't manage to finish it between the two of us. We had no idea what the different curries were, but it was all very tasty, and my pain threshold had definitely increased, so I was able to keep up with Federika. While out walking one day, we came across a large field with hundreds of young girls doing some kind of dance. I had no idea what it was all about, but it was really quite moving. There was only one beach in Galle, which was crowded and not very nice, so we went to a beach at Unawatuna. What more can a person ask for than a beach, a good book and a free sunbed and shade? During the drive to the beach, the tuk-tuk driver cleared up another mystery for me. We had noticed how crazy the bus drivers were in Sri Lanka, weaving in and out of traffic like in a Hollywood car chase. One morning, while we were in Ella, there had been a fatal accident not far from us when a bus crashed into a lorry head-on. The reason for the reckless driving was that many different bus companies were operating the same routes in competition. Drivers were on a low salary, but got a commission on how many fares they picked up. If a driver saw a bus in front of him, he would try and overtake it so he could pick up the people waiting at the next stop. By the time the slower bus got there, the bus stop was empty. With the roads being narrow, it was a disaster waiting to happen. It was a joy to stay at such a good and well-run hotel, and we spoke quite a lot with the owner. One thing that surprised me was that the rooms didn't provide tea and coffee-making facilities, which you would expect in a hotel of that standard. It didn't bother us, but I was interested to know why. The owner told us that they used to provide electric jugs, but they had so much trouble with Chinese guests cooking in them that she had to remove them. Rice, potatoes and eggs were what we usually cooked, but on one occasion someone cooked crabs, and as it was impossible to get rid of the smell, she had to throw the jug away. Mosquito bites remained a big problem for both of us. I had no idea if they were all bites from Tangalle or if they were new bites from Galle. We had some good antihistamine cream for the itchiness, but it didn't have much effect, so I looked on the internet to see if there was anything else we could try. I wished I hadn't. The search results showed countless headlines on how there was a big problem with dengue fever in Sri Lanka. Several TripAdvisor users reported that they had caught it in the Galle Fort area, which was exactly where we were staying. To make matters worse, there was an open storm drain next to our hotel where one of the nearby hotels was pumping raw sewage, which was the perfect breeding ground for dengue fever mosquitoes. The general opinion was that there was not much you could do about it, except not get bitten, but by then we had at least 100 bites each. I was not going to lose any sleep over it, but I did start using my repellent even though the stink from it bothered me more than the mosquitoes. We spent 5 nights in Galle, and it was the first time I could remember that we felt we had spent too long in a place. It is always better to be sad to leave.
I thought I heard you crying in the darkest hour of night. It was just a long forgotten scene. How it hurt to see you while your body shook with fright, till I told you it was just a silly dream. I did my best to comfort you and wipe your tears away, and sing gently while you drifted off to sleep. And all would be forgotten at the start of every day. My love for you was as tiring as was deep.
When we planned our holiday, it wasn't until I bought the visa online that I discovered that it only lasted 30 days. We were staying 34 days in Sri Lanka, and as our flight was already booked, we were committed to those dates. We inquired about a visa extension in Colombo at the start of our holiday and were told we could get it during our travels, which was wrong, as it had to be done in Colombo. There was the possibility of just turning up at the airport with an expired visa and hoping for the best, but I read too many unpleasant stories from people who had tried. Some got away with it, and others were taken into an office to be interrogated and banned from entering the country again for 5 years. There was no choice but to travel early to the immigration office on the day our visa expired, which meant we weren't able to use our first-class train tickets for that journey. We had to pay for a 3-hour taxi ride and be dropped off at the immigration office. I left Federika at the office and went with our luggage back to the hotel before rejoining her. The immigration office was in total chaos, and we had to queue at 5 different places, which took most of the day. So, despite being desperate for tourist income, the government thought it would be a good idea to limit visas to 30 days. Any longer, and tourists would be punished by charging them double the price of the original visa and making them jump through hoops to get an extension. The office was packed with tourists who had done the same as us and resented having to waste a day of their holiday in that way. How many millions of dollars did Sri Lanka lose every year from people who limited their holidays to 30 days, which we certainly would have done had we known the situation? We splashed out to stay at the Cinnamon Red Hotel for our last few nights, but it was a disappointment. Despite being only 2 years old, the hotel had a major fault with ventilation. We rarely used air conditioning, so we turned ours off as soon as we arrived. A few hours later, our room was very damp, and when we told reception, they gave us the bizarre instruction not to turn the air conditioning off. We didn't want to be forced to use air conditioning, so they moved us to a different room which was no better, and after more messing around, we gave up. The hotel knew that some of their rooms were damp, and their solution was to give 2 free cupcakes to anyone who complained. The last few days in Colombo were pretty uneventful. It was Poja Day again, full moon, and that month was an especially big one for Colombo, as all the dancers and elephants walked around the city centre instead of a suburb like the previous month. We saw it all when we started our holiday, so we just took a short walk near where it was taking place and saw a few performers, but we didn't want to be held prisoner like the last time. I assumed, like in most countries, participants in these kinds of festivals did it for fun, but I was surprised to learn that in Sri Lanka it was big business. Every month there was a festival somewhere in the country, and these same dancers went to each one and got paid. The elephants were privately owned and rented by temples for their festivals. Depending on the distance, they were either delivered by lorry or they walked there. They were even hired for private parties. What a way to impress your friends, to literally have an elephant in the room. With nothing much to do, we went to the National Museum one morning. I always liked the idea of going to museums, and for the first couple of exhibits, I would look at them and marvel at their age and imagine someone using them 2,000 years earlier. 10 minutes later, I became overwhelmed with fatigue and the desire to never see another old pot for the rest of my life. The problem with museums is that they defy the golden rule of entertainment. Always leave them wanting more. No one in history has ever walked out of a big museum saying, "That was really good, but I wish they had more exhibits." Our last night was perfect and started back at Galle Hotel for Bellinis. We went there on our first night and loved it, but must have missed the star attraction. An official-looking man marched slowly from a hotel door, followed by a Sri Lankan bagpipe player complete with kilt and sporran. They walked ceremoniously down the 2 hotel terraces to the edge of the property overlooking the sea. Stopping next to a flagpole, the official pulled a string which lowered the Sri Lankan flag so he could take it off and store it overnight before putting it back the next morning. While the bagpiper was wrestling with his instrument in an effort to play a tune, the official couldn't untie the flag. The bagpiper's face grew redder and redder while he wished he had taken up the guitar instead. Of course, everyone loved it, and it gave us an excuse to have another Bellini, as we couldn't possibly go before he had untied the knot. After a pleasant walk along the promenade, buzzing with parents and happy children, we passed a huge building site which was part of a 10-year development paid for by the Chinese. A shopping mall, and heaven knows what was being built on reclaimed land. According to our tuk-tuk driver, they seemed to be the font of all Sri Lankan knowledge. The last Prime Minister had sold large parts of Sri Lanka to the Chinese, and the ordinary workers would get little in return. He claimed that the entire workforce for the project was Chinese, so there were very few jobs for locals, which I would have thought would be the main condition of allowing such a project. I am sure it was more complicated than that, but everyone we spoke to felt they had been sold out by politicians. Then again, I suppose all citizens of all countries felt that way about their governments. Finally, we arrived at the Ministry of Crab, a superb and well-run establishment which, despite being large and expensive, you had to book days in advance for lunch or dinner. We had a fabulous meal of crab in chili sauce. I had been gradually building up my chili pain threshold, and I thought I was getting there, but it had a really sloppy sauce which covered my mouth and went up my nose, so parts of me not normally exposed to chili were set on fire. The next day, our flight was at 10 o'clock at night, and because of all the trouble we had at the hotel, they gave us a free 6 p.m. checkout. There was a lot of work going on at Colombo Airport, so I was dreading checking in, but I was surprised at how quickly we got through. In the duty-free area, we discovered that Colombo must be the only airport in the world that doesn't accept its own currency. They only accepted major currencies but gave change in rupees, which we couldn't spend or take out of the country. As always, we both really enjoyed our holiday, although it wasn't as cheap as we were expecting due to 30% tax being added to everything. It made hotel prices around the same as Croatia, but with nowhere near the same level of service. I had assumed prices would be similar to India, but one man we had spoken to, who spent every English winter travelling between India and Sri Lanka, said India was around half the price. I was also a little irritated at the number of times I was told I was not allowed an alcoholic drink, even on Independence Day, the one day of the year you would think alcohol would be compulsory. Even when it wasn't forbidden, the government made licenses so expensive that it was beyond the means of smaller restaurants, so they had to serve it illegally or not at all. On the plus side, it was certainly a beautiful country, and I can't say I ever remember such warm and friendly people. The tuk-tuk drivers, when they weren't trying to sell us something, were a delight to talk to. One driver charged us the correct fare rather than the inflated tourist one, but he was so entertaining I ended up giving him 3 times what we agreed. In between bursts of telling us how happy and honest he was, he burst into song. It was one of those kinds of impromptu and unique memories that made a trip worthwhile, and they are things you can never plan for. Thank you for listening to Nemo James Travel Diaries. Photos and videos of my adventures, together with my music and the books I have published, can be found on my website www.nemojames.com/travels. You will also find details of my mobile phone app, Wordbanker, which is designed to help you build a foreign language vocabulary. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please click the subscribe button and share it with your friends. It will mean a lot to me. In the next episode, we will be traveling to India, New Delhi, Taj Mahal and Jaipur.
Do you like the songs I've sung to you? Do you like the time that we've been through? Do you like my music? Do you like to sing along? Yes, we like the songs that you have sung. We like the friends that we've become. We like your music. We like your music. We like your music and the words of your song.